Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our 15th webinar in the Africa Teachers Webinar Series. Today, we'll be focusing on accelerated learning programs for children out of school and refugees. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. Before we go any further, some general housekeeping items. Interpretation is available in English, French, and Portuguese, and I'm really excited. I see participants from Mozambique joining. So welcome. Please choose the language you prefer, and recordings and PowerPoints will be made available after the session. You'll have access to that. And lastly, we have a Q&A session at the end of all presentations. So please share any comments and questions in the chat, and we'll ask our speakers accordingly. Now, please joining me in welcoming the Director of UNESCO ICPA, Dr. Quinton Worden, to give opening remarks. Dr. Quinton?
Thanks, Camelia. Just to welcome everybody. We probably have a number of repeaters, meaning people who have been present at many of our webinars. This is a series that we started in February 2025, and we are very happy to do this in partnership with the Global Partnership for Education SCIX program, that is Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. We manage at ICPA the Africa 19 Hub. Another partner is the European Union Regional Teacher Initiative for Africa. We also partner with the African Union, and then finally AFTRA, the Africa Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities. After those webinars, we also produce knowledge kits, and all of the participants and people who registered will receive this. Today we seem to have a bit less participants than usual, but that's okay. This is actually a very important topic, accelerated learning programs for children and youth out of school. And we are lucky at ICPA to start right now a new project in 3 countries on accelerated learning programs. And I just want to thank here the government of Japan that has provided us the funding for this new project. So please do not hesitate to put questions in the chat and to send us also comments and ideas in the knowledge kit that we produced after each series of webinars. One of the things we do is to list a series of resources that are available on the web, and we post those resources in the Africa Education Knowledge Platform. That's a tool on our website where you can access quite a few resources related to education and, of course, teachers in Africa. So let me stop here, Camelia, and give the floor back to you. And again, to all the participants, thank you. We are very happy that you are here, and do share comments. At the end of the webinar, Camelia will share a little 2-minute survey. It's very useful for us to know what you think and how we can improve. Thank you. Back to you, Camelia.
Thank you so much, Quinton. A quick note to our interpreters, please switch to the French channel, as I think you were speaking in the English one. Okay. Yes, please switch to the French channel. And thank you again to Dr. Quinton for those opening remarks. We do provide a bunch of resources after the webinar sessions, and we'll share the links in the chat shortly. Now, please, without further ado, please joining me in welcoming Martha, the coordinator for the Accelerated Education Working Group at INEE, to deliver keynote address. Martha, please.
Thank you so much, and hello, colleagues. Thank you to UNESCO for inviting me to open this really important conversation. My name is Martha Hewison, and I work for the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, and I specifically lead our work on out-of-school children and youth programs to mitigate learning loss, and I also lead the Accelerated Education Working Group. And I just like to say I'm delighted that we have UNHCR, we have and Geneva Global, who are also presenting here today and who are members of the Accelerated Education Working Group too. So across Africa, we know the scale of the challenge. I think we are all familiar with it. And UNESCO's data estimates 180 million children, adolescents, and youth who are out of school. But behind these statistics are children and youth who have had their education disrupted by conflict, displacement, poverty, climate shocks, a whole host of reasons. And for children and youth who have had their education disrupted or who have never actually been to school, getting them back into education is just the beginning. Once they're back in education, how do we help them access the appropriate programs to to meet their needs and, really importantly, also to meet their demands that enables them to catch up? And once they're in these programs, how can learners be retained and supported to learn well? And after these programs end, how can we ensure, which is really important, that there are appropriate transition pathways into further education? So over the years working in this space, I've noticed some kind of key trends in non-formal, alternative, and accelerated education. And I wanted just to share those briefly with you today. So one thing I've noticed is this recognition of a more nuanced approach and awareness to matching learners and programs. I would say 10 years ago, when I started working in this space, too often accelerated education was seen as like a catch-all for all out-of-school children and youth. And as we are all aware, the reasons for being out of school vary, contexts are very different, learners have very different needs, and learners who are struggling in school or who have never actually been to school or dropped out of school need specific programs that match their specific needs. And accelerated education can be one of these programs, but it can also be a wide variety of other non-formal education or alternative programs. And in recent years, I spoke a lot, I always speak a lot about the different programs and different definitions and the importance of terminology. But in more recent years, I really see much more awareness and much more nuance when planning these responses across the board, from ministries and donors and organizations alike, looking at learners and looking at the variety of non-formal education programs that cater to meeting the needs of these learners, rather than just using accelerated education programs as a catch-all for all out-of-school children and youth. And I think linked to this recognition of this more nuanced approach to programming, the Accelerated Education Working Group has really seen the demand for support really broaden from just requesting support around accelerated education programming to really countries requesting support on programs that mitigate learning loss or learning recovery, and how wider non-formal education programming can support learning recovery and learning continuity. And there's much more awareness of the need to identify learner programs and match learners with learner profiles and match learners with appropriate programs. And also something else that's really important is linking these programs to ensure that there's a clear transition pathways. I think there's an increasing recognition that non-formal education programs and accelerated education programs need to lead into something. We need clear transition pathways back into formal education or further education or training, or for older learners, skills development, livelihoods, employment, whatever is appropriate to the context. But I've seen much more recognition of linking accelerated education and non-formal education and aligning it with ministry curriculums and having recognition from ministry so that these transition pathways are smoother. And then I think we all know that ministry and local ownership are really essential for success. And I think it's well understood that accelerated education, non-formal education programs need to be aligned to national education systems, as I've just said, to really support the transition of learners into pathways that can transition into formal education or similar. And I can see much more of non-formal education programs with ministry recognition and ministry curriculums. So whilst I've talked about these positive trends, a trend that I've really noted in the work that we do is the importance of this preparedness space. And the importance of preparedness and working in the preparedness space is really critical, and I think it's often really overlooked. That ministries and stakeholders often consider these programs to mitigate learning loss or catch up on learning after a crisis or when a crisis is occurring. And we need to really ensure that we have these programs in place before any disruption happens. And through strengthening these links between this initial emergency response and the development of these more structured, non-formal pathways, this prolonged reliance on short-term kind of emergency programs is reduced. And if there are these structured pathways from emergency programs into more structured NFE programs already in place, it then makes the transition back into formal education much more smooth. So having these programs in place before an emergency as part of the education system, I think, is a really important component of any good quality, inclusive national education system. And as I've already said, it really supports more effective transitions from emergency programs into non-formal and ultimately back to formal. To note, I think this is really something to note on this webinar in particular. So the AWG has a global mandate. And in my experience, I've noted that countries in Africa often have very strong non-formal education or alternative pathways. I think the majority of countries have these pathways in place, and this is certainly not true across the globe. Recently, we've done lots of work in the Middle East, and whilst in the Middle East region, and these are big generalizations, but in the Middle East region, there's a high percentage of learners in school, there are very few non-formal and alternative pathways. And when a crisis has struck, which it has a lot in that region, they are really struggling to adapt the programs, develop these pathways. One example that I wanted to talk about from Africa is an example that's often used, but from Uganda, which I think has a very good example of a strong accelerated education program that's been used for a very long time now and has provided opportunities for overage children and youth who have had disruptions to their education, specifically around the refugee and host community learners. And I think one of the really key learnings and success of this approach, it has combined a condensed curricula with flexible scheduling and community involvement, but really importantly, it's embedded and aligned and recognized by the Ministry of Education. They use the same curriculum, but a condensed version, and this enables the transition from learners from accelerated education into formal education at any grade. So once the learner has caught up, they can transition back into formal education, or for learners that go through the entire system, they can actually sit the end of primary leavers exam and then have pathways to continue their education. So in closing, I would just like to return to the learner, which is at the center of this discussion. And I think a learner who has missed 3 years of school should not have to wait another 3 years before we can offer them meaningful pathways back into learning. A girl who has dropped out of school because of displacement or poverty or family responsibilities should not be defined by what she has lost. And a refugee or a displaced child should not have to choose between education and the realities of survival. Accelerated education is, at its best, not about lowering expectations. It's about refusing to let lost time become a lost opportunity. Because ultimately, this is not simply about accelerating education. It's really about accelerating opportunity and making sure that no child's disrupted education becomes a permanent barrier to their future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Martha, for that very inspiring speech. I really appreciate that point about about the not making lost time into lost opportunity, and also bringing perspectives from the Middle East and very strong program from Uganda. I really appreciate that. A quick note, interpretation is available. Maybe you need to click on the more button, and then you can choose the language you prefer. Now, please joining me in welcoming Germa and Janet from UNHCR to deliver the opening presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, UNESCO, for inviting UNHCR. This is a very good opportunity for us to interact, to learn around this accelerated education program, how important it is for out-of-school refugee children. So my name is Girmaya Deta. I'm education officer for UNHCR based in Copenhagen, Denmark. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about one of the defining education challenges of our generation, ensuring that refugee children who have been excluded from learning are given meaningful opportunity to return to education and realize their full potential. As you may know, nearly 7.2 million refugee children are out of school, representing almost half of all school-age refugee children worldwide. For refugee children, being out of school is not only an education challenge, but also a protection, equity, and development challenge. Many displaced children lose more than access to school. They also lose their identity, their confidence as learners. Education for refugee children is about more than literacy and numeracy. It is also about healing. It's also about belonging, rebuilding hope for the future. For refugee children who live with uncertainty about safety, food, housing, and displacement, all of which directly affect their ability to learn. Especially adolescent girls, as the previous speaker, Martha, mentioned, they often face additional barriers such as caring for responsibilities, income generation for the family, pressure for early marriage, requiring flexible learning pathways. As we are talking of out-of-school children and accelerated education, we should also remember the role of teachers. Teachers are the bridge back to learning, helping children close the learning gap, building confidence, and regaining hope in children. Accelerated education, as previously mentioned, helps children recover not only lost learning, but also the belief that they can succeed in education again. Success should not be measured by enrollment alone, but by whether children can stay in school, learn, progress, and see a future for themselves. Finally, before I hand over to my colleague Janet for a little more detail, if we are really serious about leaving no child behind, we must invest in pathways that restore dignity, rebuild hope, and help every refugee child reclaim their future. Thank you so much. I will hand over to my colleague Janet to take us a little bit into the discussion. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for having me. My name is Janet Akala, Education Officer for UNHCR based in Copenhagen, Denmark. This opening presentation is setting a shared foundation in terms of some of the key concepts, the evidence on where things stand globally, and where UNHCR and the sector see the biggest opportunities before handing over to the case study presenters. Next slide, please. As we have this conversation today, two things are converging right now. Displacement is at a historic high, and financing is being cut just as demand grows. Together, refugees and out-of-school children and youth are most at risk of being left behind entirely, which is exactly the gap accelerated education programs exist to close. Next slide. For us to have a shared vocabulary before we look at some of the evidence from the next presenters, the core concepts for today, out-of-school children, I'll also be looking at who a refugee child is and accelerated education programs. So out-of-school children and youth in the context of the webinar today are children and adolescents of primary and secondary school age who are not enrolled in formal or non-formal education, including those who never enrolled, are at risk of dropping out, and those who dropped out. Refugee children refer to children who have been forced to flee their country due to conflict, violence, or a well-founded fear of persecution, and they fall under UNHCR's mandate. Over 4 in 10 forcibly displaced people today are children under the age of 18, underscoring the importance of education and, by extension, accelerated education program. In terms of the terminology, accelerated education program, Martha is here. We moved from accelerated learning program to accelerated education program, just to highlight that in terms of definition, it is flexible, it is age appropriate, it is covered within an accelerated time frame. It is meant for overage, out of school children and youth. It leads to equivalent certified competencies. And just to clarify, as Martha had initially mentioned, the distinguishing accelerated education programs from other options is that accelerated education programs are certified in nature, they are time-bound, and they are designed to transition learners back into the formal education system through exams, whether it's through vocational training or employment. Next slide. In terms of a glimpse into the scale of the challenge in terms of refugee education, by end of 2025, refugees under UNHCR's mandate had passed 41.6 million. And almost 40% of these refugees are under the age of 17, underscoring the imperativeness of education. This shows that the refugee population has more than doubled, and with about 12.4 million of them being school-aged children. Despite this progress, as you can see the bar chart, 46% of these children, that is 5.7 million, are out of school. They are presumed to be out of school. They remain entirely out of school. Enrollment drops sharply with age, as you can see, 67% primary gross enrollment, secondary 37%, as we proceed to tertiary 9%. The pattern is clear, as you can see. The problem gets worse as children get older. Exactly the population accelerated education programs are designed to serve. Next slide, please. What the evidence and UNHCR reporting consistently point to are 6 recurring challenges. Financing is under pressure from aid cuts. Overage and interrupted learners have nowhere to go in rigid age-graded systems. There are weak links between accelerated education programs and national ministries of education, causing certification and transition problems. Steep secondary to tertiary education bottlenecks driven by distance, cost, documentation, and legal status. data and monitoring gaps concentrated in the hardest to reach conflict affected countries, and chronic underinvestment in the specialized teacher training accelerated education programs require. Allow me to inform the participants that accelerated education programs succeed or fail on teacher quality. Where they are, accelerated education programs are accelerated in nature, they are multi-grade, they require psychosocially informed pedagogy, which is a specialist skill, yet it remains one of the most chronically under-resourced parts of the sector. Next slide, please. Opportunities, however, exists, which we can turn into priorities in line with the UNHCR Education Strategic Direction 2030 and some of the reportings from UNHCR. They point to some of these opportunities and also priorities, which is integrate refugees into national systems rather than parallel structures, invest specifically in secondary and post-primary pathways, institutionalize accelerated education programs within ministries of education so they are recognized and quality assured. And this, I make reference to principles 9 and 10 of the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, Accelerated Education Working Group's 10 principles: legitimate, certification, and national system alignment. Protect financing for refugee and crisis-affected education, then close data gaps in conflict-affected countries, and leverage technology to extend reach cost-effectively. Accelerated education isn't a stopgap. If done well, it's one of the most direct tools for closing the gap. Next slide. As I finish and set the stage for the case studies, as just to share the shared starting point, a growing out of school children and youth and refugee population, most importantly, concentrated in Africa, a system that struggles most with overage and secondary learners, and evidence-based principles for good accelerated education. My 3 questions, allow me to pose these 3 questions to the participants that I request you to keep in mind while listening to the case studies. What made the program reach children the formal education system couldn't? How does it connect to the national system? And what it would take to scale? Thank you, and back to the chair.
Thank you so much, Germa and Janet, for that good overview and setting our terminologies straight for the base as the discussion for our case study presentations. Next, we have 3 case study presentations based on actual country practices. Our first one is delivered by Dr. Joshua on the Speed School in Ethiopia and Uganda. Dr. Joshua, please share your screen and start your presentation.
Okay, do you hear me okay? Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very good. Are you seeing my screen?
It's coming now. Yes, you're
Okay,
good to go.
excellent. Very good. So thank you very much, everybody. It's really an honor to be included in this webinar, and I thank the presenters for setting things up so well. So I'm going to be presenting one model of accelerated education that we call the Speed School. Speed School is a model that Geneva Global adopted from Strum Foundation, which implemented and still implements Speed School in West Africa for, I think, almost 20 years. So the outline of my presentation, I'm going to stay off video because of bandwidth. So first, I want to give a quick overview of the Speed School model, its evolution, and its impacts. I want to talk about the process and experience of government adoption, which is proceeding well in both countries. And I also want to talk about AEP as a springboard to greater education quality system-wide. The last speaker spoke about connecting to the government system, and Speed School has actually been an inspiration and a model for improving primary education and even secondary education across all of the education system in the two countries. So, like most accelerated education programs, the goal of Speed School is to allow a government and its development partners to bring its out-of-school children into primary school with the skills and motivation to thrive there. In Uganda, we're talking a couple million kids by some estimations. In Ethiopia, we're talking by now probably over 10 million children. I don't have the precise numbers, but I know in Amhara, just one region, there are over 6 million alone because of conflict. Fits in with the Sustainable Development Goals in the ways that everyone would expect. There are 5 key components, one of which is uncommon, the other of which may be common across most AEP programs or AEPs. It begins with 1 year of accelerated education for children aged 9 to 14 with gender parity and the goal of inclusion across all classes. We also, in Uganda, work at level 2 and level 3, which covers grades 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7. But classically, and in Ethiopia in particular, we only work at the grades 1, 2, and 3 levels. We use a condensed curriculum, which in Ethiopia, we develop the curriculum with the federal government and the regional governments, condensing their official primary school curriculum for grades 1, 2, and 3. In Uganda, we use a curriculum developed by the National Curriculum Development Center with the support of NRC, the Norwegians, and Save the Children. We use what we refer to as an active pedagogy. It's similar to play-based pedagogy. It's very learner-centered, very active, and it's one of the pillars, the core pillars of the success of the Speed School model. And the other big pillar is the holistic training approach. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but we work with government structures, colleges of teacher education, mostly in the two countries, to train teachers, not just in the theory behind competency-based or activity-based pedagogy, but in the practice, and then make sure that we're paying attention throughout. And I'll say a bit more about that later. It's not entirely unique, but the rarer part of the program is self-help groups. We recognize that children are not in school often usually because of poverty and then displacement. So we have self-help groups for all the mothers or sometimes fathers or other guardians of the Speed School students. And that focuses on financial and social empowerment, helping them with group savings and also with income generating activities. I should add that in both countries, we began working entirely in host country schools, not in refugee settings. Now in Ethiopia for several years, we've been working with internally displaced populations, and for 2 years now in Uganda, we've been working with refugee populations. So the evidence of success, I could go on for hours talking about the program itself, and I'd be happy to extend conversations with anyone who wishes. But looking at the evidence of success, our internal data year in, year out for the past 15 years shows that about 95% of the kids who enroll complete the year. Of that group, about 95% transition to mainstream classes based on official placement tests created and administered by the districts, the district education offices, which routinely place about 75% of the kids into grade 4, as expected, about 15% into grade 3, and the rest split between grades 2 and 5. And then the self-help groups continue to thrive, even though we only work with them for that 1 year. We've had 3 longitudinal studies completed, 2 in 2017, 2018 in Ethiopia, 1 in Uganda in 2023, that show across the board 4, 5, 6 years later, former speed school students are dropping out less, they have better attendance, they have better academic results, and they have better social emotional standing in their schools and greater support from parents. We routinely have joint monitoring missions, whether with government structures or with our funders, and that consistently points to the strong learning in the speech school classes and the continuation of learning advantages as they proceed to government conventional classes. And then there's been a lot of independent research by funders and research groups. Just last year, there were 2 chapters in scholarly books and then scholarly articles over the past several years on the program. We've won the WISE Prize. We're in the Hall of Fame of 100.org's top 100 scalable innovations in education worldwide. And then several studies that we conduct internally. And I want to talk about just one of them that we conducted in 2024, the end of 2024. Hearing continuously from government folks and other actors on the ground how former speed school students continue to excel, we wanted to study that a little bit. So we reached out, did surveys of 120 classes in Ethiopia, 120 teachers in Ethiopia, 120 teachers in Uganda, and asked them to tell us the rankings of their former speed school students in their class. These 240 teachers were talking about in the vicinity of 37,000 students, because each teacher taught several classes. And if you look on the right, the total for the 2 countries, about 21% of those 37,000 students, or 132 students per teacher, about 20% of them were former speed school students. About over a third of them in the top 10 of that 132 students per teacher were former speed school students. And if you look at the top 20 of those 132 students, over half of them were former speed school students. So speaking to the learning gains or the learning assets and achievement that they gain in the speed school classes and how those persist 2-3 years later in government classes. We also asked them to compare the learning strategies and behaviors of the former speed school students to their classmates. And on a scale of 1 to 4, they consistently reported them to be a full point higher, statistically significant. So that study is available on our website. And if you reach out to me, I can share it with you. The secret sauce of speed school, there's nothing secret about the pedagogy, right? There's nothing secret about how we expect teachers to teach. It's learner-centered, it's continuous formative assessment, it's contextualizing lessons, it's peer learning. These are things we've been teaching teachers for decades. The difference is that our teachers use it and teachers in conventional classrooms right next door to them do not. And we attribute that to a couple things. One, it's how the facilitators use the methods, right? It's how we train the facilitators, how we monitor and support them, and how we help government sustain and scale the model, right? So just to talk a little bit about that. To my mind, it all begins with a condensed curriculum. We give them just the minimal learning competencies, right? We remove a lot of the examples, illustrations, applications, And in doing so, we give teachers the opportunity and also the obligation to contextualize the lessons, drawing on the local context. We see the local context as a second textbook or as a complementary curriculum. So they're drawing on it for their information, examples, skills, applications, et cetera, that we've removed from the official curriculum, condensed curriculum. We rely on truly learner-centered methods, engaging students as active learners, inquiring, discovering, practicing, collaborating, etc. We perform truly continuous formative assessment. Teachers have time to pause. They have time to repeat. They have time to explain again. And they have time to check the learning of all their students. We started with 25 students per class. Now we're up to 42 and even 48 students per class, which means moving from 5 groups of 5 to 6 groups of 8 or 6 groups of 7. And we foster purposefully learners' personal competencies, their creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, things like that. This takes root with teacher training. We prioritize training to practice over training to learn theory. And it continues with paying attention. We don't just plant the seed of new knowledge and techniques, we water them, we fertilize them, we weed them. So steps towards government adoption, I hope I'm not abusing the time. Very quickly, in Ethiopia, the federal and regional governments have all created their own speed school units. The accelerated education program is officially within the 5-year federal and regional education plans. The federal and regional governments are responsible for condensing the curricula. The accelerated education program is captured in the official education management information system, albeit not well, we're working on that. Government in Ethiopia funds and operates over 90% of speed school classes, or they call it accelerated education program classes. Teacher educators from the colleges of teacher education are training the AEP teachers, and there's a government partner accelerated education program working group. A lot of this came to be thanks to the AEWG and Martha's support. In Uganda, there's the national AEP curriculum, levels 1, 2, and 3 with AEP guidelines. There's no national implementation or funding, but the districts, at least with Geneva Global, are implementing all speed school classes. Their inspectors, their teacher college agents train, monitor, and support facilitators. Classes operate in government schools, that's true of both countries, and student transitions managed by the districts, that's also true of both countries. Major challenges for Ethiopia is poor, inconsistent training and support of teachers, so there's poor understanding and use of the model in classes. The model asks more effort of teachers. We're still exploring that to see what it really means in terms of hours, but that's at least the claim. One thing we do know is that classroom teachers in upper primary teach just one subject, and the speed school or AEP teachers are expected to teach 2 or 4 subjects. And there's inconsistent data capture and use. In Uganda, there's no financial buy-in from government, no steps for sustainability and scaling at the moment, although a lot of policy is happening. The model is focused on refugee populations, and there's diffuse government leadership of AEP. That is, it's some parts of the ministry are doing one thing, some are doing other. They don't always speak to each other. And that's also very true of Ethiopia. I've got just one more slide looking at the impact of speed schools system-wide. Schools at the local level are seeing the difference in speed school teaching and speed school students. And many head teachers or inspectors are taking initiative to train conventional teachers in the pedagogy and classroom management methods found in speed school. That's in both countries. Inspectors and CCTs, the college agents, are introducing methods purposefully to school teachers in all classes in schools where there are speed school classes. In Uganda, the colleges of teacher education are incorporating speed schools conception of competency-based education and practice-focused teacher training methods into pre-service and in-service training across the system at both the primary and now also at the secondary education level. University training and process is in the process of revising the education curriculum competency-based education using the Speed School model as reference in Ethiopia. Elevating school-led teacher CPD, continuing professional development and education community of practices is happening in Uganda. And the program has also, over the past several years, inspired greater international funding of accelerated education programming in Ethiopia in particular. So I hope that I kept the time. Thank you very much. Here's my email for anyone. And I look forward to discussion later on.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Yes,
Stop sharing.
Great at timekeeping. I think we're pretty on time for this session. Thank you for introducing us to the Geneva Global Speed School model in Ethiopia and Uganda. Now we're going to the other side of the continent, West Africa. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Leslie to present to us the accelerated education model in West Africa. Dr. Leslie, please go ahead. I can see your screen, but I can't hear you yet.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone from West Africa. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Good. I just wanted to present some of the research that we're doing under the GPE KICS and some of the models that are evolving in Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. We've been working on this research for over 10 years. Associates for Change has been working on accelerated education research for probably about 25 years as it evolves in Ghana, but we've scaled our research up to West Africa in the last few years through GPE KICS. And we want to thank them for that support. As we've mentioned, the out-of-school challenge is growing in Africa, but particularly in fragile conflict and violence-affected areas. Nigeria is a very good case of this, where we started our research 5 years ago in Nigeria. It went from about 15 million to 19 million or above out-of-school children. Ghana is a case of about 1.4 million. Burkina Faso is about 1 million out-of-school children and others. The funding modalities have been mentioned. There's an incredible reduction in aid support to these programs. Most governments have been heavily dependent on assistance, development assistance, to scale up their accelerated education programming in West Africa and the continent. And with the funding cuts, that also means a great support is needed by government to kick in. We also have a lot of support from faith-based and NGOs on the continent that are trying to address the out-of-school challenge. We know Geneva Global and others are doing their best, as well as the Strom Foundation in Burkina Faso, and several other nonprofit organizations. We'll mention a few of them: Save the Children, Plan, and others. Just not to dwell on it too much, but the barriers to entry and completion at basic level persist. The quality of basic education often prevents children from completing primary education. Trained teachers refusing and unable to be deployed to rural deprived areas is one of the greatest challenges for West Africa. The cost effectiveness and the allocations that are provided to these innovative programs that allow for acceleration are very small. Usually less than 1% of the budget. Ghana is a case in point, Nigeria as well. Their governments have to invest in these programs based on cost efficiency and effectiveness studies that we'll present in a few minutes. But just all to say, the demand and supply factors over the last 20 to 30 years persist in most rural deprived areas of the continent, mainly due to food insecurity, agricultural practices that require labor, and then the growing conflicts and fragility across many West African contexts. The sociocultural factors also persist because they are they are very much intertwined with the need to sustain family, with large families, and also early marriage and child fosterage. So these are persistent socioeconomic and sociocultural practices, not to mention the supply side factors, where we see increasing government budgets moving towards secondary and tertiary education at the cost of primary education in many parts of West Africa. There's a number of models in West Africa that are working, and I'm so happy that Joshua could articulate so well the speed school model, which is very similar. As mentioned, in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the strong foundation for over the last 20 years has been more or less scaling up with the governments of those countries, a speed school model that starts with local language, mother tongue for the first year, and then transitions into the second language, French, for the last 2 years. It is a condensed approach to primary education, often 3 years. We also have the same model in Sierra Leone, where we just finished a curriculum that will allow the government of Sierra Leone to collapse its primary school system from 6 years to 3 years. That's a speed school model that's working in those country contexts. The one I want to mention, though, that's a little bit different, which is the Ghana model, and in some countries like Nigeria, it is also working alongside a model that really focuses on 1 year for children to re-enter the mainstream system after 1 year. So similar local language, usually mother tongue, the first, that 9-month to 1 year program. And then the transition often helps children transition into P3, 4, or 5, depending on their competency. These models have been working for over 25 to 30 years in Ghana. The Nigerian government has taken it on in the last 5 years. And the model in Nigeria also has 2 other levels for junior high school, but it is yet to be fully put in practice. I think Dr. Joshua also mentioned a very important component that we are modeling in a learning lab in Ghana and Sierra Leone, in the northern regions of Ghana and Sierra Leone, where we saw a diminishing amount of donor assistance to those countries. We felt that it was needed to test out a community-driven approach which would not require any government or nonprofit support. So in 2 or 3 districts in Ghana and in 2 in Sierra Leone, we are modeling what's called a community-driven approach to complementary basic. And we're finding incredible results, where facilitators that were trained in the past have come back to work for their communities, for savings and to be involved in savings and credit schemes, and to also get support both in kind and through labor with their communities. The model is very similar to the self-help approach, which is connected to the speed school model, but this one is working with communities for 1 year and beyond, where they govern the AEP model, and then they, through livelihood training, they improve their agricultural and livelihood skills. Now, accelerated education approaches generally in West Africa, when they're tested, 80% of the graduates transition to the formal system. But the question is, how many stay? And that requires a deeper understanding of the contextual reality of poverty, food security, and other factors, sociocultural factors that can pull children, especially girls, out of junior high school. We've done several studies, tracker studies, to measure the sustainability and retention of girls and boys when they transition to primary and complete, and then transition into junior and senior high school. And as Dr. Muskin has mentioned, the results are very promising, very positive. Their learning outcomes, which I'll show in a few minutes, are quite strong. But I want to first talk a little bit about the providers that are providing accelerated education across West Africa. These are familiar names, I'm sure, AfriKids, School for Life, CEA, the government's own program in Ghana. In Nigeria, we have Kanem Borno, and then Horn of Hope. And this is the government's program is ABEP, the Accelerated Basic Education Program, that are all providing accelerated education in West Africa. not only in developmental context, but also in IDP and also refugee contexts. In Ghana's case, the refugee context is in the Upper East, where 9,000 Burkina Faso families are positioned and being given support by UNHCR and others. And the Catholic Bishops Development Organization is supporting AEP in that area, along with UNICEF. In Sierra Leone, we have other providers, and Burkina Faso, I've mentioned a few of them. Most of these are nonprofits that are really committed to accelerated education and find ways of sustaining it with or without donor financing. I'm going to skip a few here to the Ghana model, which I've described. And I want to just highlight the one that was being used in the last few years in Horn of Hope, which is in the Borno state, Kornembano, which is one of the partners to this research, where over this period of 3 cycles, they were working with local governments in Borno state to provide a 9-month program in mother tongue for children in both IDP and IDP camps, as well as developmental contexts, mostly IDP camps, to support them to transition back into school. The age cohort was between 10 and 18 years of age. Their target groups were approximately 10,000 children, and they used the 9-month program to deliver 1 level. USAID's program scaled this up to several other states in the Northeast, but of course, it stopped a few years ago. The implementation modalities, as other presenters have mentioned, rely heavily on a condensed and simplified accelerated curriculum. Often, the best practices show that non-state actors are working alongside government in hard-to-reach areas of the country, and you can't overemphasize this more. Our research is showing that where it's only government delivered, it's not as effective, because we need animation and mobilization by community members to start savings and credit and other types of modalities to support and sustain the facilitators. There's operational issues as well, where we see in contexts like Ghana, they have developed a division fully dedicated to complementary basic education. And that division, of course, a little bit underfunded, less than 0.005% of the basic education budget went to it this year. But there needs to be more research and advocacy to increase that. Again, the EMIS system has to also be strengthened to collect not only systems-based school data, but also out-of-school data. And then there is legislation as well, improving the conditions for out-of-school children in these contexts. As we look across West Africa, and we are drawing on Uganda and Ethiopia, particularly Uganda, when we were developing the speed school models in Sierra Leone's curriculum, we really drew on both Nigeria and Uganda, who had developed a very strong framework for accelerated education. And we want to thank as well the AWG for sharing much of this curriculum with us. But there is a growing momentum to review and to improve the curriculum. We look for, as Joshua was mentioning, simplicity in training. The training component of AEP is essential, where facilitators are trained with a very participatory mandate, and that their interactions and empathy towards the learner, who has often been out of school for several years and requires a social and emotional connection to their facilitator. The classes are small, not more than 25 learners, and at least 55% of them are often girls. Girls have a very this is a great opportunity. AEPs is a tremendous impact for girls' education in West Africa and Africa in general. You see the results from Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and others. I'm just going to quickly share some of the major impacts on girls in a few minutes. But as I mentioned, the research that we've been doing in the last few years demonstrates, no question about it, between 80 and 90% of AEP learners transition into upper primary, but the question is how many stay. Our research is showing about 50% are able to stay till the end of primary 6, and approximately 40% of them transition into junior high school. But out of that, we're still having to measure the ones that transition from junior high school. Not as many. They do have a resilience, though. There's a great resilience to stay in school. But the food insecurity and the lack of water and the distance to primary and junior high schools is an impediment. We have talked about the reduction of out-of-school children from a government perspective. This is one of the greatest contributors in Ghana's case to increasing net enrollment in those areas, and then reaching areas that will not be served by primary formal education systems. This is the most recent research that you can find on our website is with Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ghana, where we just finished a situational analysis in the conflict and fragile affected areas of all three countries. There's separate studies, but the Burkina Faso one is very, very important. It demonstrates that children in these areas that are marginalized and drop out, especially girls, there's a level of parental preference in both Ghana and in Burkina towards AEPs, meaning that before children enter primary or junior high school, parents prefer that they actually engage in an AEP, that they are participants in an AEP program. The facilitators are highly motivated in these areas. Sometimes they've served for 2 to 5 years in an AEP program in West Africa, often not receiving more than $15 US a month, which is 1/10 of what a trained teacher receives. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I just want to mention a few of the learning gains from what we can see here. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just getting a lozenge here. What we see in the research that we've been conducting, as Dr. Muskin was mentioning, is there's an incredible comprehension reached, a level of comprehension amongst AEP learners, and just basic competencies in reading, writing, numeracy in the programs. Once the children transition into the formal system, they also acquire English and a second language as well as French. So with the 1 year of local language, they acquire foundation learning skills at a competency that puts them ahead of their peers in primary and junior high school. I've mentioned a lot about girls' education, but the Burkina Faso study was astounding to see what girls benefit from when they enter AEPs and transition into the formal system after an SSP. I know my colleague is coming up next, so I don't want to dwell too much on Burkina Faso, but I do want to say that the results do show higher levels of self-confidence, improved relationship to their parents and community members that change attitudes towards forced and early marriage, protecting themselves and becoming self-reliant and able to perceive themselves in a new way. Sierra Leone's latest results show that girls complete where they're able to in speed schools. Their completion rates, having finished AEP programs, a much higher completion rate, and this is at senior high school level. After having gone through AEPs for about 3 years, they're able, these were results from senior high schools after they had transitioned the program from Save the Children almost 8 years before. So there's a willingness amongst parents also to think differently about their children, especially their girl child trajectory, and to see them in a different light. Finally, on cost effectiveness, and I'll end in a few minutes, the cost effectiveness data has always shown that for governments to provide support to AEPs is about 1/10 of the cost of trained teacher deployment. So if one trained teacher is their salaries a month is 1/10 of what it takes for a facilitator, an AAP's facilitator. But on a scale for schooling and classrooms, it's 1/3 the cost of formal education for 1 year, for 1 unit cost. So for 25 learners to go through an AAP program, the cost is going to save governments in the long run and improve the conditions of foundation learning in remote rural areas and fragile contexts on the continent. I just want to also highlight some of the main aspects of the adapted programs in West Africa are similar to East Africa and other parts, that they have a flexible and adapted timing. They're often in the afternoon for 3 or 4 hours, and they're value-based. They have a positive support to agriculture and livelihoods and parental support, and they also project an importance of using entrepreneurship, business, and local language in their curriculum. The recommendations, of course, are that we try to ensure that the AU, ECOWAS, and other institutions ensure that there's a 5% mandate for governments across Africa to invest in accelerated education, especially given the donor climate. This projection was 2 years ago based on our research with GPE KICS, and we see that Nigeria has been given an accelerated, there has been more financing provided by some of the GPE support, and then the Qatar Fund for Sierra Leone. But I think it's more about government support, the 5% government support through basic education and what have you. I think just in general, our research is showing that to sustain AAPs in the West African context and likely across Africa, we need more community-driven approaches. Ones that take on the approach where communities will sustain with or without outside financing in hard to reach and in areas where there is no other support. There are models of village savings and loan and livelihood support that can provide a community hope that they will be able to support their AAP learners. Finally, that sustainability question is very important also within fragile communities. And lastly, we're just starting a study now on the impact that additional digital communications will have. And just in ending, I just wanted to mention that in September, at the end of September, we're holding a high-level conference in West Africa. And I put on the I put in the chat box some of the dimensions of that. If anyone is interested in coming to join us, we'll be working with Geneva Global and others to look at the models in more depth with the governments of Africa. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for this very rich presentation on many different models we have in West Africa, and for introducing us to our next speaker from Burkina Faso, Madame Marguerite. As Leslie mentioned, our next model is a long-running program for the strategy of accelerated learning in Burkina Faso. So now I'll hand over to you, Madame Marguerite. À vous, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ok, merci bien. Bonjour tout le monde. Et merci à l'UNESCO pour cette opportunité offerte pour partager notre expérience, l'expérience du Burkina. Slide. Voilà. Et nous dirons que la mise en œuvre de la SSAP repose sur des standards clairs et une répartition du rôle entre l'État, les partenaires et la communauté. Alors, notre communication s'articule autour des points suivants: le contexte, les approches mises en œuvre au Burkina, les standards, les réalisations, les enseignements tirés, les défis et enfin une étude de cas illustrant l'impact concret de la stratégie. Alors, depuis son indépendance, le Burkina poursuit son objectif essentiel, à savoir la scolarisation universelle et l'inclusion des enfants hors école. Et ces défis s'inscrivent dans 3 cadres majeurs. On a les engagements internationaux tels que l'éducation pour tous, les ODD, le développement durable et la protection des enfants. Il y a également des engagements au niveau national qui placent l'éducation au rang des priorités avec les efforts pour améliorer l'accès, la qualité et l'équité, notamment la parité filles-garçons et l'inclusion des enfants en situation de handicap. Il y a également la loi d'orientation de l'éducation qui constitue le socle juridique de ces ambitions. Alors, en ce qui concerne la SSAP, deux formules principales sont mises en œuvre au Burkina Faso. Slide. Deux formules sont principalement mises au Burkina Faso. La première formule utilisée est de 9 mois de cours, dont 2 mois en langue et 7 mois en français, dans un contexte classique, avec une variante appelée la SSAP en cas d'urgence, d'une durée de 7 mois de cours, dont 2 mois de langue et 5 mois de français. La deuxième formule est la stratégie de scolarisation accélérée, formule 2, qui s'adresse aux enfants et adolescents âgés de 13 à 14 ans pour une durée de 2 ans. Cette formule connaît également une variante adaptée aux foyers coraniques, du fait que ces foyers coraniques connaissent une fréquentation du nombre d'enfants dont l'encadrement mérite une amélioration. Une fois l'urgence passée, slide. Slide encore. Alors, il faut noter qu'au niveau de la SSAP, il n'y a pas de redoublement. Voilà. Merci. Et au niveau des passerelles, vous voyez, ce schéma illustre les passerelles possibles qui offrent à un enfant hors école passer par un centre à passerelle. L'enfant, il rentre à 9 ans. Quand il rentre dans un centre à passerelle, SSAP, il reçoit un cours de 9 mois. Et après les 9 mois, il y a une évaluation de fin d'année. L'enfant est transféré dans une école primaire classique en classe de CE2 ou en classe de CE1 en fonction de sa moyenne ou au CP2. Alors, ou bien si l'enfant reste dans le centre, il peut continuer pour la deuxième formule qui, à ce moment, il aura 14 ans. Et il fait 2 mois de formation pour se présenter au certificat d'études primaires. Alors, à partir du CEP, l'enfant qui est dans le centre, il peut aller faire la 6e générale, l'enseignement général. Il peut aller en 6e lycée technique. Il peut aller dans un centre de formation professionnelle pour une formation continue en formation professionnelle ou dans un centre d'éducation de base non formelle. Nous dirons à ce niveau que les dispositifs montrent que quel que soit l'âge et le parcours d'un enfant, il existe toujours une voie de réintégration scolaire ou professionnelle garantissant une seconde chance et une meilleure inclusion socio-économique des enfants hors école. Slide. Alors, nous dirons que la mise en œuvre de la SSAP repose sur des standards clairs et complémentaires. Nous avons sur le plan stratégique, les standards stratégiques qui s'appuient sur la stratégie du faire-faire, avec une répartition des rôles entre l'État, les partenaires techniques et financiers, la société civile à travers les ONG, les associations ainsi que les communautés bénéficiaires. Sur le plan opérationnel, il y a la mobilisation sociale qui est essentielle, information, sensibilisation de la communauté pour garantir leur adhésion, afin qu'ils puissent mettre à disposition des animateurs, les locaux, pour les salles et puis pour leur hébergement, ainsi que le maintien des apprenants à travers le suivi. Et il faut noter que chaque centre accueille 25 à 30 apprenants avec une attention particulière à la parité filles-garçons. Enfin, nous dirons que les dispositifs reposent sur un personnel qualifié, le coordonnateur, un superviseur, les animateurs placés sous la tutelle des ONG et des associations opérationnelles. En plus de ces standards, nous notons également que le dispositif repose sur des standards pédagogiques et financiers. Sur le plan pédagogique, le rythme scolaire est de 6 jours par semaine. L'approche utilisée est l'appui avec des spécificités propres à la stratégie, l'usage du bilinguisme soustractif, le couplage des opérations en mathématiques et l'étude de 3 à 4 sons en lecture au cours d'une même séance. Sur le plan financier, une table de coûts encadre l'ouverture et le fonctionnement des centres. Et dans cette table de coûts, nous avons une étude préalable. Il y a la rémunération du personnel, à savoir les coordonnateurs, les superviseurs, les animateurs. Il y a les équipements pour les centres, il y a la logistique pour les déplacements, pour les questions de supervision. Il y a également les sessions de formation, de renforcement des capacités et des matériels pédagogiques. Il faut noter que en ce qui concerne le standard financier, pour un nouveau centre classique de 30 enfants, 30 apprenants, le coût moyen annuel est de 5 533 995, soit environ 184 466 francs pour un apprenant. Il faut dire à ce niveau que les 184, si on veut comparer avec l'école classique, c'est les 184 francs pour un enfant d'un centre à passerelle, c'est 3 années de scolarité pour un enfant au niveau de l'école classique. Pour un ancien centre, ça veut dire que si le centre est ouvert l'année prochaine, il n'y aura plus d'équipement, il n'y aura plus d'achat, il n'y a pas de grande logistique à acquérir. En ce moment, le coût du centre devient à 3 486 185 francs, soit 116 206 francs pour l'apprenant. Alors, ces standards garantissent à la fois la qualité pédagogique et la viabilité financière du dispositif. Au niveau des principales réalisations, slide. Depuis sa mise en œuvre en 2006, la SSAP a eu un impact considérable. Elle a permis d'inscrire 154 585 apprenants, dont 75 652 filles, et de transférer plus de 132 000 enfants vers les écoles primaires. Sur le plan des ressources humaines, 335 encadreurs pédagogiques, 86 directeurs d'école et 273 enseignants ont été formés avec une forte participation féminine. Les enseignants des centres de résilience ont acquis une double compétence en langue nationale et en pédagogie, ce qui renforce la qualité de leurs prestations. Les résultats sont visibles. De nombreux apprenants de la SSAP réussissent aujourd'hui au primaire, au post-primaire, au secondaire et même à l'université. Certains sont déjà actifs dans divers domaines professionnels au Burkina Faso. Slide. Et nous avons les principales l'évolution du nombre des centres SSAP de 2019 à 2025. Ouais, en 2019, on avait 572 et en 2020, ça a un peu baissé. En 2025, c'est reparti à 527. En 2021-22, nous avons encore reconnu une baisse. Et de 2024 à 2026, 25, en tout cas, une hausse, passant de 460 à 686. Il faut noter que les résultats de cette année, en 2025, on a environ 700 et quelques centres. Et nous ne les avons pas mis parce que nous n'avons pas encore pu stabiliser, parce qu'il y a des centres qui ont été ouverts et qui n'ont pas encore fait leur évaluation. Voilà pourquoi nous n'avons pas inscrit les données de 2025. Slide. Alors, au niveau des effectifs, vous regardez la courbe. Voilà, de 2019, ça évolue, ça baisse. Et en 2024-25, on a en tout cas 19 473 enfants qui ont été transférés dans les écoles formelles. Slide. Toujours dans les effectifs transférés, voilà. Au niveau, ça, les 19 000, c'était les inscrits, ça, c'est les transférés. On a 17 256 transférés en 2025. Slide. Alors, toujours dans les principales réalisations, nous avons l'adhésion de la communauté à la formule. Certains enseignants encadrés sont plus en plus convaincus de l'efficacité, si bien que dans de nombreuses provinces, ces centres sont pris en compte dans l'organisation des concours d'excellence. Nous notons que cette année, en tout cas, il y a eu beaucoup d'enfants qui sont ici des centres qui ont été primés dans les concours d'excellence au niveau des régions et des provinces. Slide. Alors, comme enseignement tiré, et nous dirons que malgré les acquis, plusieurs défis majeurs restent à relever pour consolider la SSAP. Les enseignements tirés. Depuis sa mise en œuvre, plusieurs enseignements majeurs se dégagent. Il y a d'abord l'ancrage institutionnel à travers la prise en main de la formule par l'État, qui favorise la mobilisation sociale et l'adhésion des communautés et des partenaires. Il y a l'engagement conjoint de l'État et des partenaires Il constitue un véritable tremplin pour l'intégration des enfants hors école. Ensuite, il y a la mobilisation communautaire qui paraît comme une étape incontournable pour réussir l'installation et le fonctionnement des centres. Il y a également les animateurs qui ont besoin d'un accompagnement pédagogique régulier, intégrant la discipline positive et la prise en compte du genre, ce qui améliore la participation et les résultats des apprenants. Par ailleurs, la qualité des enseignements dans les centres facilite la réussite des enfants transférés vers les écoles formelles. Et si les enfants que nous suivons, quand vous arrivez dans les écoles formelles, avec les résultats, nous voyons vraiment qu'il y a eu de la qualité dans les centres. Alors, nous disons également que la SASAP permet de rattraper le retard et de réussir les socio-insertion économique pour les enfants hors école. Enfin, il y a la disponibilité d'un répertoire des partenaires techniques et opérationnels qui renforcent la cohérence et la durabilité. Nous dirons qu'aujourd'hui, au jour d'aujourd'hui, nous avons environ une dizaine de partenaires techniques et financiers et environ 24 ONG opérationnels de mise en œuvre à travers le Burkina Faso. Il faut souligner que la SASAP est mise en œuvre aujourd'hui dans 24 provinces et nous sommes en train de vouloir aller à l'échelle sur 45 que compte le Burkina. Et slide. Voilà, au niveau des défis maintenant. Et la couverture du territoire national, malgré les acquis, plusieurs défis majeurs restent à relever pour consolider la SASAP. Il s'agit d'abord de garantir une couverture nationale conformément au plan d'expansion, en intégrant davantage les langues nationales et en adaptant les manuels pédagogiques. Ensuite, il y a le suivi de la traçabilité des apprenants, qui doit être renforcé grâce à une plateforme que le gouvernement a voulu mettre en place. Il y a également l'ouverture des centres dans les zones périurbaines de Ouagadougou et de Bobo. Il faut noter qu'à ce niveau, à Ouagadougou et à Bobo, dans les quartiers périphériques, regorgent de beaucoup d'enfants et nous essayons de voir dans quelle mesure prendre ces enfants en compte. Et enfin, il y a la réalisation d'un film documentaire sur l'impact qui permettra de valoriser les résultats obtenus et ainsi que un dernier défi, à savoir la fréquentation des enfants dans les sites d'orpaillage artisanaux, qui est une préoccupation. Slide. Alors, comme étude de cas, on a dit qu'en 2025, dans le village de Touro, dans une province, il a été concentré un nombre élevé d'enfants hors école pour résoudre les problèmes de scolarisation. Un centre SASAPI a été ouvert par une ONG AFDR pour accueillir ces enfants âgés de 9 à 12 ans. C'est ainsi que le jeune Tasséré, alors âgé de 12 ans et fraîchement revenu de la Côte d'Ivoire, a été inscrit dans les 10 centres. Après 9 mois d'enseignement, il a été transféré à l'école primaire de Touro en classe de CM2, où il a poursuivi son parcours scolaire avec succès, rattrapant 3 années de scolarité. Slide. Son cheminement illustre pleinement l'impact de la SASAP. En 2019, il a eu son CEP d'études primaires qui lui a envoyé en 6e. En 2023, il a réussi à son BPC. En 2024, il a reçu son brevet professionnel. Actuellement, il est en stage pratique à l'Office national des eaux et de l'assainissement de Ouayouga. Et à la rentrée 2026-27, il sera candidat pour le baccalauréat professionnel en agroalimentaire. Alors, nous dirons que le parcours de Zida Tasséré témoigne de la pertinence et l'efficacité de la SASAP dans la réinsertion scolaire des enfants vulnérables. Son évolution de l'accès limité à l'éducation dans son village jusqu'à la préparation de son diplôme illustre la capacité de la stratégie à transformer des vies et à ouvrir des perspectives d'avenir. Slide. En conclusion, nous dirons que la SASAP et ses formules connexes se révèlent être des alternatives pertinentes, efficaces et efficientes pour atteindre les objectifs de scolarisation universelle et ceux de développement durable. Elles contribuent à améliorer les indicateurs d'accès et de qualité de notre système éducatif tout en valorisant nos langues nationales. Elles sont efficientes car elles permettent de gagner 3 années de scolarité par rapport au système classique. Elles répondent aux besoins éducatifs des enfants affectés par la crise, notamment ceux qui regardent leur localité d'origine. Et la réussite de leur mise en œuvre repose sur un principe fondamental, l'engagement et l'accompagnement de tous, l'État, les partenaires, la société civile et la communauté. Ensemble, nous pouvons faire de la SSAP un véritable levier d'inclusion et de transformation sociale. Merci pour votre aimable attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Marguerite. Thank you so much for a very concrete case study and introducing us to the Burkina Faso's SSAP. I think with all the numbers you displayed from the financial part and also enrollment, transfer rate, etc., I think that gives us a very good idea of how this program is running. And I saw that, thank you to all the participants. You are very active in the chat, posting your questions and comments. Now, please let me hand over to my colleague Marianne to lead us through the Q&A session. Marianne.
Yes, thank you so much, Camilla, and thank you to our wonderful speakers. I want to also thank Joshua for answering some of them in the chat box already. I've been seeing it's been quite active over there. So we have a couple of good questions that are coming in, and please keep them coming. Please keep posting here as we even do the Q&A. I think I would like to first start with one for our first speaker, Martha from INEE, and then I'll also pose a second one too. So Martha, are you able to hear me? I think you're still in line.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, great, Martha. So there was one question from a French speaker in Gabon. The question is about how the curriculum that children adhere to. The participant said that in Gabon, the children do not have the specifically tailored programs. Instead, they follow the same curriculum as other students in accordance with the principle of general inclusion. Would you advise that this is a good strategy for general inclusion with the same curriculum as everybody else, or do the children need special tailored educational curriculum? What would be the best situation from your experience when there's a tension between the general curriculum and the specific curriculum for children who need the accelerated learning program? They were asking about Gabon specifically, but maybe we could speak at large about what's really better for students is to be included with others or to have specially tailored curriculum. So would you like to address that first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think an accelerated education program, by the very nature of its name, is accelerated, so it has to go faster. So it's unrealistic if it's an accelerated education program for it to use the same curriculum and for students to follow the same curriculum as students going at the regular pace. So the whole principle behind an accelerated education program is that the curriculum is condensed in various ways and at various rates of acceleration. But the principle behind it is that the students can cover, core content, often basic foundational literacy and numeracy, plus other core subjects in order to be able to progress and transition to the next grade, or ultimately potentially even transition through all the grades and sit for a primary school leaving exam. So yes, it's not appropriate that accelerated education learners should follow the same curriculum because that would not allow them to go faster. So it's really appropriate for them to follow a curriculum that is somehow condensed. These are done in different ways, but it should allow the learners to progress through the curriculum more quickly. And just to add on the last thing, when we talk about a condensed curriculum, we do not mean teaching the same curriculum quicker. That's not the pedagogy or the principle behind accelerated education. The curriculum should be truly accelerated in various ways. But I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure it did, but I tried.
Yes, thank you, Martha, for that. I think that comes up sometimes when we do these types of discussion, is that wouldn't children benefit from getting back into the mainstream system, so to say? Or how long do they stay in the accelerated program? The same question tends to come up when we do like inclusive education, for example, like for children with disabilities, or children who have been out of school for some time, like in this case, or refugee children. It's an interesting question. And I think the participant who asked it, maybe others would have something similar. So thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Maybe I could go next to Joshua. There were quite a few questions for you, and you've addressed some of them in the chat box already, but maybe I could pose two here that I don't think you've answered yet. So Joshua from Geneva Global, there was a question. Can you please share the scale you've reached in each country, the approximate number of students enrolled every year, and how you managed to build capacity in the respective ministries to deliver the program at scale? I'll ask that one first because it's sort of a two-part question. So Joshua, over to you. Hope you can hear.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. So in Ethiopia, we're now approaching about 1 million students, having begun in 2015. But that counts the students that attend AEP classes funded and operated by the government. So a lot of our effort now is focused on helping the government to run its programs successfully. In Uganda, after 10 years, we're at about 70,000 students. We've been doing this with private funding. In Ethiopia, we started getting funding from UNICEF and then from some other organizations, or beginning around the time of COVID. And just last year, we got our first contract with UNICEF in Uganda. So all of that's been with private money. And as far as bringing the government on board, we started in the very beginning, we got the permission of government to do this. In Ethiopia, government basically laughed at us and said, you've got to be kidding, covering 3 years in one. But go ahead and do it. So we did it in the South for the first several years, working entirely with local NGOs. We would train them in the model, we would support them in implementing the model, but they were responsible to go out to the schools and train and support the teachers. And we were getting results, but we were also realizing that the way we were doing this was not sustainable by any stretch of the imagination. Just one example of why each speed school facilitator would receive a support supervision visit once a week from the NGO. So we started focusing on working through and with government structures at the district level in both countries. At the national level, more collaboration with the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia, working with a variety of different departments, ANFE, the Adult Non-Formal Education, teacher training, teacher development program, school improvement program, more recently curriculum, and others. In Uganda, it was really with the districts. We signed memorandum of understanding every year with the district, not just the district education office, but the district authorities. And then we worked directly in partnership and support of the district education office and the teacher training colleges, primary teacher colleges. And then now we're starting to work at the central level in Uganda with Uganda National Institute for Teacher Education. Hopefully that covers the question.
Yes, thank you, Joshua. And I think that part about working with the ministry might come up later with a question that I'll address to all of the speakers in just a minute. So let me move on to a question. Maybe I'll skip that one. So Madam Marguerite, are you able to hear me? I hope the translator is still hearing this, but for the speaker who just went from Burkina Faso, Madam Marguerite, I want to ask you a question. So there was a question or two that came in about your presentation. So the question I'd like to first ask you is Burkina Faso able to cover the costs associated with the accelerated education system? We know that there's a cost issue that was brought up for the overall national education system. So is Burkina Faso able to cover the cost for the accelerated education, this particular program? And what strategies might be in place to guide the learners in the accelerated education programs as they leave the system and they go off into the mainstream schooling system? So to Madam Marguerite, from Burkina Faso. Over to you.
Oui, allô? J'ai été interpellée, mais comme c'est un peu limité, c'est en anglais. Est-ce qu'on pourra un peu reprendre en anglais, en français pour que je puisse répondre? Allô?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Yes. Apologies, I'm happy to repeat. So the questions were in French. The question is about your presentation. Is Burkina Faso able to cover the costs associated with the accelerated education system? So the programs that we're talking about, can the state afford to cover them? And what strategies can Burkina Faso employ to guide the learners as they leave the AEPs and go on to the regular schooling system?
Allô? Et est-ce que c'est la question qui se trouve dans le chat?
Oui, madame. Oui. Donc, quelles sont les stratégies que l'État burkinabé met en place pour accompagner les encadreurs qui accompagnent les apprenants dans l'éducation accélérée? Et aussi une autre question sur si le gouvernement peut couvrir tout le coût pour le programme accéléré. C'est ça.
Alors, c'est bien compris. Et en ce qui concerne la première question, quelles sont les stratégies que l'État met en place? Nous dirons que l'État burkinabé s'est d'abord approprié la SSAP. Quand j'ai parlé dans les enseignements tirés, j'ai parlé de l'ancrage institutionnel. C'est-à-dire que la SSAP est reconnue officiellement par le gouvernement du Burkina Faso depuis 2006. Et il y a des directions qui ont été créées pour pouvoir piloter cette formule. Donc, du coup, l'État a un droit de regard et une main mise sur tout ce qui se passe en matière d'éducation accélérée. Et il y a également la formation des encadreurs. La majorité des encadreurs ont été formés sur le terrain pour pouvoir être dans la dynamique de la spécificité de la SSAP et pour pouvoir accompagner les ONG et les enfants qui sont transférés dans les écoles d'accueil. Au niveau de chaque direction provinciale où il y a la SSAP, il y a des points focaux qui sont spécialement formés pour pouvoir suivre les activités de mise en œuvre de la SSAP sur le terrain. Et il y a également que l'État ouvre les centres, l'État finance même les ouvertures des centres depuis 2011. Et au jour d'aujourd'hui, l'État il y a un projet, le projet d'apprentissage accéléré pour les enfants et adolescents non scolarisés, qui est financé par des partenaires et piloté par l'État elle-même. Donc, l'un dans l'autre, dans les deux questions même se recoupent. Ça veut dire que l'État burkinabé, au niveau de la mise en œuvre de la SSAP, ça veut dire l'État a le leadership dans cette formule. Et comme exemple, même si sur le terrain, une ONG a une difficulté, ils se recourent à l'État, ils font recours à l'État à travers les directions provinciales, régionales qui sont sur le terrain pour pouvoir résoudre un peu la situation. Et si toutefois il n'y a pas de solution, ils font recours maintenant au niveau central et ensemble on regarde comment faire pour l'accompagner. Ok, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. Thank you for your answer. I want to pose one question. I wasn't sure who to address it to, so I would offer it to anybody who wants to take it, or maybe everybody could take it if they all want to speak briefly about this. So to all of our speakers today, what specific role do international non-governmental organizations currently play in bridging the funding and training gaps for educators in these crisis-affected zones? And maybe we might even expand that to the funding and training gaps for ministries to address out-of-school children. So what role do or even can our organizations play in bridging the funding and training gaps for educators as well as for ministries of education in offering accelerated learning programs. Does anyone want to take that?
I'm willing to take the first stab at it. International NGOs rarely have their own resources to bring to this, right? We need resources. One thing that I think that we have been able to do, well, there are two things that I think we can do, and I tried to do this, and Leslie also referred to it. The one is to give the government a very clear, tangible, effective model of accelerated education that it can take to its funders and attract resources to be able to expand its coverage. And I think that's something that has happened, certainly in Ethiopia, and may be happening also in Uganda. The other, and this is the point that Leslie raised as well, is to come up with a model that's truly cost effective. Leslie gave some great indicators of how that's true with many of the models that she's been working with or studying. We had an independent study done, the longitudinal study we had done in Uganda showed that the per child cost of getting a child from 0 to, or grade 1, if you will, to grade 4 in Uganda through Speed School was about half the cost of the per child cost of getting a child through the conventional system to grade 4. So we're not going to bring money, but we can create models and generate evidence showing the value for money worth of the different models. I'll stop.
Thanks, Josh. I just want to add to that. I think more and more, given the aid context, we need to look at mainstreaming accelerated education pedagogy within the pre-service and in-service programs, especially pre-service. We're working right now in Upper East Ghana with the psychosocial support being mainstreamed by 2 international non-governmental organizations, which has now been uptake. The uptake is there with colleges of education, and the minister likely will one day scale that on. So psychosocial support for teachers in these areas, but also with the pedagogic knowledge of how to conduct and support AEP learners, but more importantly, the participatory approaches to pedagogy within the foundation years. And that is a great contribution that AEP organizations that are promoting AEP, supporting them, can really help governments in the pre-service training of their teachers. So I do see that one way as technically supporting. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add on to what my colleagues have already said. I mean, similarly, but I think that, evidence shows very strongly that these accelerated education programs, and indeed any kind of non-formal education program, is always more successful when it's really owned and sustained by Ministry of Education or national authorities. And I think as Leslie and as Joshua have given good examples of how, I guess, the international community can support, ultimately these programs will only be sustainable if they're really embedded and if they are part of the education sector plan, part of the education system. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think that a good education system should be accessible to all, and it should have pathways and provision for those, for whatever reason, have dropped out or not been able to enroll. So I think as much as the international community can support, ultimately what we are all aiming for is for ministries to integrate these non-formal alternative pathways into their education sector plans and into their education systems more generally. And just to say, in Latin America and the Caribbean, what we would sort of call non-formal education is actually embedded within the formal education system. And when I've worked in Latin America and I talk about non-formal pathways and formal pathways, people don't understand because they're pathways for learners that have dropped out or learners who have been unable to enroll are just part of the regular formal education system. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Martha, Leslie, Joshua. I think that's very clear. I do have one more question. We're running a little short on time, so I'll just quickly jump to the question. It's for Leslie. It's about the specific program that you've elucidated on. It's about the phases, the accelerated phases. So after the displaced learner re-enters the mainstream system to continue their education, what happens if they are further displaced, if it happens again, and they're again forced out of the mainstream schooling system? Is there a policy in place, a plan to recognize their prior learning and to bridge the further gaps that come in when it keeps getting disrupted?
That's a great question. And I think that falls back to what Martha just said. Unless and until governments fully embrace and integrate accelerated education with EMIS, with the systems, to see it as part of the global picture of basic education, you won't see that type of re-entry. Once the child has dropped out, maybe they've dropped out before accelerated education, they're now going back for the second time, it's likely they're not going to go back. What we're seeing in West Africa, though, is the need to connect to vocational and apprenticeship training. Not every child can support its education through the formal system of education. It's very costly for subsistence farmers. And so we need to strengthen the relationship between accelerated education programs and apprenticeship and VOTEC. Again, VOTEC might be too expensive as well. But what we need to do is give them an alternative to formal education, because often they will not be able to sustain themselves, even though they really want to stay in the system. By the time they get through primary to junior high school, you see girls struggling to walk those 3 or 4 kilometers without food. They have to go without, the basic needs. So it's very critical that we look at alternatives that have savings and credit, have income generation and skills development, so that they do have a chance at a second life, a second trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's always so clear when you speak. Thank you to all of our speakers, and I want to pass it back over to Camilla.
Thank you so much. Please join me in giving a round of applause to all our speakers for sharing their insights and also answering some of your questions. Feel free to get in touch with them. I believe some have shared their email addresses. And I'm sure they are more than happy to engage with you regarding this program. And also, before I hand over to our last closing reflection speaker, my colleague will post the survey for this webinar. Please share with us your thoughts, your ideas for the webinar series. Yes. Now, last but not least, please join me in welcoming Monsieur Jacques from DRC to share his reflection. Monsieur Jacques, la parole à vous. Monsieur Jacques, vous êtes là? Oui. Yes, yes, Mariam, please help me in putting the survey link into the chat. And in the meantime, Monsieur Jacques? Allô? Je vous entends pas. Allô, Monsieur Jacques? Also, as Dr. Quinton mentioned earlier, there are quite a few resources we have regarding the webinar series, including all the recordings and PowerPoints will be made available after this session and from all our previous sessions. Also, we prepare a knowledge kit that consists of the summaries of the presentations and also a list of documents relevant to the topic that you might find helpful. So those links will be made available also in the chat. Monsieur Jacques, vous êtes là? Looks like we have a little bit of a technical issue right now.
Try to unmute, ask him to unmute.
He has unmute.
I think
He has unmuted. I would suggest you to reconnect. But before that, also here, as Marianne will put in the chat, we have all these links for you. And I'll do a quick preview of our next webinar unit, which will focus on continental education strategy for Africa 2026 till 2035, and the second continental report by UNESCO focusing on SDG 4 and CESA. So the topics will be on foundational learning, TVET and skills, and effective teacher policy planning. We'll also drop a link in the chat for registration. So please, we would love to see you again for this new series. Let's see if okay. Monsieur Jacques, on ne vous entend pas maintenant. J'ai vu que vous avez activé votre micro, mais on ne vous entend pas. Okay. Thank Monsieur Jacques. Allô? J'ai entendu quelques sons.
Yes, Camelia, it seems like he's facing, Mr. Jack is facing problem with his micro.
I see here the microphone is on, but I couldn't hear anything.
Hi, Camelia. This is Kasumi from ICPA. I just wanted to say that we invited Monsieur Jacques from DRC to share some reflection for the webinar, but also the initiative, reflecting on the initiative that he and his organization is leading in relation to accelerated learning program for children out of school using digital technologies as well. Maybe we can share what he's doing after the webinar. I'm sure it will be very interesting. And I saw some comments on DRC. If there is anything happening in DRC, we'll at UNESCO ICPA, we have recently launched an initiative on out of school children through accelerated learning program. So we will be it was really a great session. Sorry to taking over this part, but through his remarks, we wanted to show some upcoming activities as well. So we will reach out to Mr. Jack for additional information that may be able to share with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kasumi. Yes, I believe all are unable to unmute themselves, so please try again, Mr. Jack or your colleagues. So yeah, please let me know if it works now. Oui, Chantal.
Allô?
Allô?
C'était juste pour essayer si ça passait, si mon micro passait, parce que le micro.
Je vous entends pas très bien, madame.
Allô?
Ok, oui.
Je vais demander à M. Jacques de venir parler alors à mon micro.
Allô, oui.
Mais apparemment, Camille est là.
Oui, je crois qu'il y a un peu de problème avec le son. Mais c'est pas grave, on peut partager votre contribution par email. Ouais. Parce que, oui. Allô? Est-ce que ça marche maintenant?
Oui, allô?
Oui. Allez.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Je crois que chez moi, j'ai toujours une difficulté et je peux emprunter le recours de ma collègue Chantal, donc je pourrais parler maintenant. Vous m'entendez maintenant?
Oui. On vous entend très bien maintenant.
Ok, merci. Pour notre part, donc, nous allons remercier l'ensemble des intervenantes et intervenants pour la qualité de leur contribution. Les différentes présentations que nous avons entendues, notamment celles portant sur les expériences menées en Éthiopie, en Ouganda et dans plusieurs pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest et au Burkina Faso, nous ont permis de mieux comprendre la pertinence des programmes d'apprentissage accéléré. Et ces initiatives constituent une réponse importante pour les enfants et les adolescents dont le parcours scolaire a été interrompu ou qui n'ont jamais eu la possibilité d'accéder à l'école. Je voudrais retenir 4 principaux enseignements de nos échanges parce qu'il nous a été demandé de faire notamment de tirer les leçons de tout ce qui était fait. Donc, après avoir écouté tout le monde, toutes les intervenantes et tous les intervenants, je note premièrement que l'éducation demeure un droit fondamental, y compris dans les situations d'urgence, en cas de déplacement forcé, de conflit ou de grande vulnérabilité. Aucun enfant, dans ce cadre-là, ne devrait être privé d'éducation en raison, donc, notamment, de ces urgences qui arrivent. Deuxièmement, l'apprentissage accéléré ne doit pas signifier une éducation de moindre qualité. Et donc, la réduction de la durée d'un programme ne peut pas se traduire par une réduction des exigences de qualité. Ces programmes doivent reposer sur les contenus adaptés, des enseignants bien formés et accompagnés, sur des méthodes pédagogiques inclusives, ainsi qu'un environnement d'apprentissage sûr et protecteur. Et je pourrais même aller plus loin. Une attention particulière doit également être accordée au bien-être psychosocial des enfants affectés par des conflits, les déplacements ou d'autres situations. Une autre leçon, donc la troisième leçon à retenir, que nous avons retenu de ces interventions, c'est que ces programmes doivent offrir de véritables passerelles vers le système éducatif formel. Sans cela, on ne fait rien. Et donc, la formation professionnelle ou d'autres possibilités d'apprentissage. Leur réussite ne devrait pas seulement être mesurée par le nombre d'enfants inscrits, mais aussi par la capacité à achever le programme, à faire reconnaître leurs acquis et à poursuivre durablement leur parcours éducatif. Quatrième leçon que nous avons tirée de ces interventions, c'est que leur pérennité exige un engagement politique et financier des États. Si les États ne s'impliquent pas, eh bien, on aura toujours, mais alors toujours des problèmes pour notamment scolariser les enfants scolarisés. Donc, les expériences pilotes non importantes sont importantes, mais elles ne peuvent produire des changements durables que si elles sont intégrées dans les politiques nationales d'éducation, accompagnées de mécanismes de financement appropriés et une mise en œuvre avec la participation des communautés, des enseignants, des parents et des organisations de la société civile. En République démocratique du Congo, la CONEP RDC, la République du Congo, ces réflexions, donc les réflexions de ce jour, revêtent une importance particulière. Notre pays fait face à des défis considérables liés au conflit et plus récemment encore, la maladie à virus Ebola qui, bien entendu, est déjà répandue dans au moins 6 provinces des 26 provinces qui occupent la République démocratique du Congo. Donc, ce problème se pose à nous parce que si on y prend garde, les enfants risquent d'arrêter leur scolarité quant à ceux. Mais la CONEP RDC a quand même une petite expérience pour notamment que nous pouvons mettre à disposition, c'est que qui est tiré de notre intervention lorsqu'il y a eu la maladie, plutôt Covid-19, c'est que nous avons, pour intervenir et donner la chance aux apprenants de ne pas arrêter leur scolarité, utiliser le numérique pour permettre aux enfants, aux apprenants et aux apprenants dans l'éducation de base d'accéder aux ressources pédagogiques libres. Et pour ne pas trop perdre du temps, si vous consultez notre site web CONEP, www.coneprdcenumère.org, vous allez constater qu'en entrant, il y a une fenêtre énumère. Et lorsque vous entrez dedans, il y a des ressources pédagogiques qu'on a mis à disposition pour les apprenants et même les enfants non scolarisés de la première année primaire en 6e année primaire et même au-delà. Mais il y a également des ressources pour enseignants. On a également disposé des ressources pour permettre à ce que des enseignements en cas d'urgence puissent être, qu'il y ait des enseignements en cas d'urgence, que cela puisse continuer. Donc, ces ressources-là sont disponibles jusqu'aujourd'hui. Donc, même pour le cas de la maladie à virus Ebola, on peut utiliser les mêmes ressources sans recourir à beaucoup trop de gymnastique. Il suffit d'entrer. Mais on est allé plus loin. Nous savons que par moment, l'accès à la connectivité Internet peut poser problème. Mais nous avons, par exemple, dans le cas précis, pris 2 écoles pilotes, que ce soit au nord Kivu, à Goma, ou au sud Kivu, à Bukavu, qui sont aujourd'hui des territoires occupés par la rébellion. Et ces écoles-là fonctionnent, où nous avons doté les écoles des bibliothèques numériques avec des tablettes où, même sans connexion Internet, les parents peuvent télécharger des ressources pédagogiques au profit de leurs enfants, et c'est véritablement le coût est nul. Le coût est véritablement nul. C'est la petite expérience que nous pouvons partager de notre expérience sur cela. Donc, voilà un peu les remarques que nous avons par rapport à la participation, plutôt aux interventions des uns et des autres, mais également par rapport à l'intervention de la coalition. Mais il faut dire que le défi aujourd'hui reste que chaque année, on devrait actualiser ces ressources-là, des nouveaux qui arrivent pour permettre à ce que, même que ce soit les enseignants ou les apprenants et les enseignants, aient accès aux ressources actualisées à tout moment. Merci beaucoup. Et donc, je remercie encore une fois l'UNESCO, IICBA, les intervenants et les partenaires et tous les participants pour leur précieuse contribution. Je vous remercie et pour votre aimable attention. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Jacques, pour votre intervention. And thank you, everyone, for staying with us despite the little technical issues we had. As we mentioned, we have posted the survey link and also the link for the next webinar in the chat. I hope we get to see you again in September for the session on foundational learning. And yes, that's all for today's webinar. Thank you again for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our great speakers.
Thank you.